Hey everybody. So this is basically just me doing the last 4 hours of sculpting for my clown bust. I didn't download OBS until I had already started, so yeah. Just mostly just doing like detailing and stuff. Yeah, so right now basically what I'm doing is my topology was kind of bad, so I'm kind of moving it around and using a shrink wrap modifier to make sure that there's no like weird spots. So like right there, for example, the the subdivided model is kind of clipping through because parts of my topology were going through the ear and it couldn't calculate where it was supposed to go correctly, so I'm just kind of fixing that up. In general, I'm really bad at topology, so don't make fun of me. And also, in general, there are some parts of the nose, like on the pimples, where there's some weird spots because I had used a very strong brush, and yeah, weird stuff happened. So what I'm doing there is basically I just got rid of a extra little piece so I could try to save at least a few polygons and hopefully it would run a bit smoother. But I'm using a laptop, so yeah, doesn't really help too much. Helps a little. You should do it when you can. But yeah. So basically now that my topology is alright, I applied the shrink wrap modifier and then subdivided a couple more times. I'm just kind of going over the topology a little bit, just to make sure there's no weird spots. And now I'm just kind of moving on to detailing. Yeah, like that's one part that kind of usually gets a little messed up because it's such a tight area that the shrink wrap kind of has a hard time. So what I'm starting to do here is I'm kind of outlining my wrinkles with the draw sharp brush, which in general you shouldn't draw your wrinkles on, but for now that's what I'm doing because I just want to get an outline and a basic idea of what I want to do. But when you're doing them for the final pass, you always want to add a little bit of volume where there's compression, because in general, wrinkles don't just really form like that, because you need to think about how volume is being preserved throughout the model. Because let's say if you were to close your fist, all the skin from your palm isn't just disappearing, it's getting moved to different parts. So we can think about that same kind of idea on the face for wrinkles. And right here, the edges of the lips would be moving into the corner of the mouth, or up towards the cheek. So we need to think about how the edge of the lip is displacing the skin and muscle and fat around the cheek, and how that would be folding over. In general, when I'm doing this, I'm trying to think about where skin would be stretching to and from. Like right here, when you close your eyes, the corners of the mouth kind of compress, and they would be stretching from around kind of the forehead and the ears down to the corner of the eye. And I kind of go a little bit overboard, but you can't really see it the final renders. So, yeah. And again, I'm just outlining right these. These are not the final wrinkles. One kind of big thing to think about when you're doing wrinkles is, in general, line quality and kind of gesture, if you will. Because a lot of times you can have really bad wrinkles if the lines don't really work well together. So you kind of need to think about how they flow into each other. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the wrinkles. And that's kind of one of the things I'm trying to practice throughout this whole video. So for example, on the cheeks, even in the final model, I'm not really happy with those because the way that they flow into each other, I'm not super thrilled with. So here what I'm doing is, for this facial expression, the muscles around the nose, I'm not sure what they're called, but those would be contracting and forming little wrinkles. I think something I can improve on later is making those a bit tighter and a bit more subtle, because right now they're very, very large. So what I would probably do is get rid of a couple of them, make them a bit wider, and then kind of do a bit more detail on this. That was the alarm for my laundry. Also, for most of this, I'm not using symmetry unless I'm making super big changes, which is important because it kind of helps give a bit more life to the character. Because in nature, almost no face is perfectly symmetrical. So doing what you can with symmetry is good, but for stuff like wrinkles and secondary details, you really don't want to do anything with symmetry. So kind of the way that I think about what secondary detail is for whatever I'm sculpting, it's the largest shape that I can get without moving any sort of topology at all. Because if you start thinking about it too small, then you get into tertiary details, which aren't super necessary at this point. And you don't really want to be focusing on details right now. On small things, kind of like pores and super small stuff. In general, I'm also not happy with the back of the neck, even in the final render, so I never really clean that up too much. So right here, the clavicle was really way too thick, especially for how old he is. In general, your clavicle will always stay the same shape because it's a bone, unless you break it. But I find that it's easier to get away with it on like stronger, more muscular characters. So you want to keep that in mind. kind of when you're, even though right now I'm doing details, if you will, you kind of always want to be looking at your silhouette in general proportions. So when I moved that clavicle back, I felt like it would help a little bit, because even though I'm in the detailing stage, if you will, that's something that I kind of noticed that would help. So changing that is always not changing, but keeping an open mind for big proportional changes is always helpful. So, like I mentioned earlier, you never really want to just draw in your wrinkles, because like I mentioned too, you have to think about the way that volume is being displaced throughout the skin, because this is what we're sculpting, is skin. So basically I'm just going over those with the clay buildup brush. I'm not sure if it's clay buildup, the square one. And I'm adding just a little bit of volume to those to make them pop out a little bit more. In general, you want to add volume to your compression wrinkles, because there are sometimes when wrinkles will form when when parts are pulling on skin, and those will generally be tighter compared to compression wrinkles. It's like in between the brow area is usually where there'd be a lot of compression, which in general the brow area I'm not happy with at all. So yeah. So one example of a stretched area for wrinkles would be the corners of the cheeks, and where the corners of the mouth is being pulled into the cheek, under the cheek, is where skin would be pulling. Also, what I'm doing for these wrinkles is I'm not just trying to add volume, is when I am adding volume, I'm kind of going across the shape, and that also helps indicate more skin being involved in that movement. Because as you notice, as I'm sculpting, adding that little bit of texture can help a little bit. One of the things that I think is interesting to think about is that wrinkles don't necessarily need to be subtracted from the model. Because what I was doing earlier with the draw sharp brush is I was kind of cutting into the model, which kind of helped with outlining my wrinkles. But again, going over that with the clay brush can help add more volume and also add more wrinkles, because the wrinkles is kind of where just two pieces of skin meet, and there's a little shadow there. So should make sure that you're not limiting yourself to just subtraction. Smiley face. It's always fun to add a little bit of spice, especially because that's going to be covered up by hair later. Just, why not? Gotta make, for all this kind of stuff, you gotta make the process enjoyable and actually fun. Because there's there's really no point in doing it if you hate it. If you hate it, why you're doing it at all. In general, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to think about how skin is being pulled and it's also being compressed. So towards the outside of the cheek is usually where it'd be a bit more compressed, and kind of in between the cheek and the eye, the corner of the eye, is usually where skin would be compressed. Whereas something kind of like the front of the cheek, more towards the nose and towards, kind of towards the nose, would be a bit more stretched. In general, it's important to keep in mind that wrinkles are very rarely as wide as they are as I have them in the forehead. So if I were to do it again, I'd probably try to tighten those up a bit. Because that's one of the things I don't really like with the Draw Sharp brush, is that it's very wide. Whereas with something like the crease brush, you can get very, very tight lines, which are usually better for wrinkles. But what ends up happening is that it pulls the topology more and get kind of uneven topology, which I find really annoying. So to fix that issue, I try to use a very small brush size and then go back over it with adding volume and kind of smushing those a bit closer. So right now I really wasn't happy with the nose, so I decided to kind of redo it. So I pulled up an image of a nose that I thought was cool and just had that there for inspiration. Not really inspiration, but yeah, that kind of stuff. One of the things I was really inspired by was there's this movie called The 100-Foot Journey, maybe The 100-Yard Journey, something like that. But the dad has a really cool looking nose, so I kind of wanted to imitate that and get that kind of feel. So basically, I'm just trying to imitate where those kind of folds would be, so in between the pimples, skin would kind of gather and make wrinkles, if you will, which, if you notice in the reference, is how that works. And for the nose, I really wasn't happy with it, so kind of see multiple times throughout the video that I just make a lot of changes because I'm not happy with it. So I'll add a lot of detail and then just completely get rid of it with smooth brush, and then do that a couple times. Because that's really all the smooth brush is good for, is just getting rid of stuff. I do find it helpful sometimes to over-exaggerate the form and then smooth them into each other, but it just depends on how you work. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm just kind of trying to add volume in between the wrinkles like I did for the other ones, but if you notice, there's a lot of brush strokes which you really don't want in your final model, because they look fun while you're making it, but they don't add anything to the model and they just look messy. So you see, after a while I smooth those out and get rid of them. What I find helpful for the brush that I'm using is to turn up or turn down the hardness of the brush, and that'll help you get smoother lines and less brush strokes. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to play around with adding kind of a bit more texture, but I end up just completely scrapping it in the end. So I'm just using an alpha that came in, it's the Flip Normal's Intro to Sculpting, and it came with it. But yeah, I did a bit of editing with color ramps to make it a bit softer and a bit fattier. But like I said, I ended up scrapping it because it just didn't really fit with what I wanted. And also the details were a little bit too consistent and too fine, so I scrapped it. I also tried doing it on the chin, but again, I didn't like it. And so don't really be afraid to just make major changes. Because if you don't like something, why have it there? It's kind of like life, where nothing really matters that much. Life is meaningless. Nothing matters. Anyways, let's get on to sculpting the nose more. So what I'm doing here is I'm just redefining the pimples because those got smoothed out too much and I wanted to keep the deepness in those. And when I was moving on to texturing, I kind of filled those with a dark brown color to help those stand out a bit more. I don't show any texturing in this video because it's too much for my computer to handle, so yeah. So right here, I was inspired by, it's called caul fat, or just a really nutty piece of fat, which for this part, I'm still not happy with it, but yeah. I liked it better than everything else, so that's what I stuck with. You see here, I'm just kind of adding adding volume and then also using the draw sharp brush to kind of outline it and give a bit more importance, because I'm trying to like cut under a little bit to make it seem like it's a separate part of the skin. And it's almost like scar tissue in a way. Right here I'm experimenting with a different brush, but I ended up deciding against it because, yeah, it's kind of, yeah, I don't really like the way that it feels to sculpt with. You know, sometimes I kind of wonder, what's the point of life? What's life purpose, really? You know, after doing 3D for this long, I sometimes wonder if we're inside of a simulation. So when you're sculpting, sometimes what I like to do is I just like to go to my lighting to see how the details that I sculpted kind of appear in the flat light, and that's the final model. Thanks for watching. So again, thanks for checking out the video. If you want to follow me on Instagram, just follow Sanjay Art Page. That's SANJAY _ art page. Thank you. Bye.